Hello BookTube and welcome to Weekly Reads. This has been a very disappointing reading week for me. So let's get started. The first book I read on Saturday is A Little More Red Sun on the Human by Gillian Conoley. This is her new and selected collection. Although unlike most new and selected editions or collections in which the selected poems from earlier collections are collected and grouped under the earlier titles. So it would be, say, from X collection, and then those poems, and then so on and so forth until the new poems come at the end. This new and selected collection doesn't do that. Instead, all of the poems are reorganized in a completely new way. So the individual sections of the collection have no meaning or have no relationship to previous collections. Rather, they're their own thing. So I thought that was pretty interesting and cool. For the most part, I liked A Little More Red Sun on the Human, but none of the poems really kind of stood out to me on this reading. So, in a way, I liked the collection, but I didn't necessarily love it. But I did manage to finish this on Saturday, so that gave me a little bit more time on Sunday. Gave me time on Sunday to read a novel, which I bailed on, and that novel was The Sound of the Mountain by Yasunari Kawabata. I'd originally intended to read this earlier in May, but decided against it, and then with the extra time of having a free Sunday, I decided to have another go at it. I first read this novel about closer to 15 years ago than 10. It's the story of Shingo Abate, a Japanese businessman who is nearing retirement age and is beginning to show signs of memory decline. Perhaps what we would now call dementia and Alzheimer's. As his days progress, he recognizes what a shit husband he's been, what a shit father he's been, how screwed up his kids are, and he's developing a bit of a sexual attraction of some sort towards his daughter-in-law, whose husband, his son, is having an affair. And he's sort of weirded out by that. So I said earlier I bailed on this, and I have conflicted feelings about that. So in this reading, the language was rather boring and dull, and I don't know if that's necessarily just something about Kawabata's style, or the translation. But I was bored with the book, and I didn't necessarily want to read about Shingo's obsession with his daughter-in-law. But the one thing I did want to talk about regarding my reading this time compared to what I remember of my first reading of this book is that I do remember liking the book when I read it like 15 years ago. But the more I think about it, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, is this nostalgia talking? That I'm remembering what I read in the past more fondly? Or am I just becoming a harsher critic of certain genres of fiction that aren't really doing it for me anymore? And I'm not entirely sure that the changing of my tastes. I don't know, and it's kind of something I do need to look into. But anyway, so that was The Sound of the Mountain. So I had some extra time, and so I decided to read a comic. And I decided to read House of X and Powers of X by Jonathan Hickman. These two miniseries act as the launching pad for Hickman's custodianship of the X-Men franchise for Marvel Comics. So at this point, and currently, the X-Men have moved to the mutant island of Krakoa, which featured prominently in the origin of the second X-Men team. So the X-Men were first created in the 60s. They were Cyclops, Cyclops, Marvel Girl, Angel, Iceman, and Beast, led by Professor Xavier. So eventually the book got canceled and went into reprints, which did well. And eventually in the 70s, Marvel decided to restart the team. And basically decided to relaunch it, reboot the team. So the original X-Men since Cyclops were captured while exploring this mysterious island, which turned out to be a mutant island, Krakoa, which acts as sort of a carnivorous island. And then Cyclops escapes and informs Professor Xavier, and they form a new team of X-Men, including Storm, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Banshee, Sunfire, and Thunderbird. And they go and rescue the original X-Men, who, for the most part, go to do other things. Beast joins the Avengers. Iceman and Angel join the Champions and other super teams. Marvel Girl largely remains with the X-Men, and then so on and so forth. But over the decades since this encounter with Krakoa, eventually an agreement is reached between the Xavier and Krakoa, and so the mutant population of Earth, after much tribulation, including about an attempted genocide every 2 months, probably in Marvel time, the mutant population moved to Krakoa, and essentially this acts as the third attempt, fourth or fifth, okay, more like fourth or fifth, attempt at a mutant nation state, depending how you count. And so House of X and Powers of X look at the foundation of Krakoa through the lens of Moira McTaggart, who is revealed to have been a mutant whose power is that of reincarnation and remembering her previous incarnations. And this is Moira's attempt to sort of protect mutant kind in this lifetime. So that narrative is sort of mirrored by a future, alternate future storyline featuring Nimrod, and then a further future storyline which is revealed to be a previous life of Moira's. And I liked the foundation of Krakoa story arc. I wasn't so fond of the alternate future storylines. But I did think there were some very affecting bits of dialogue, particularly Xavier's speech when he announces Krakoa to the world. I thought that was incredibly moving and powerful. So yeah. So I'm kind of thinking maybe about if I can get some Kindle Unlimited, checking out some more of the what's going on in contemporary comic books. So from House of X and Powers of X, I decided to start with June 1st, my Pride TBR. So the first book I read, really a novella, I read in June and for my Pride TBR is Taste of Marrow by Sarah M. Gailey. Taste of Marrow is the sequel to River of Teeth, which form a bit of a duology with a few other short stories about an alternate United States in which, during a meat crisis in the late 19th century, hippos were imported from Africa into the Mississippi. And they went a bit feral, and so you have this sort of mashup of hippos with the ranch culture that developed around cattle ranching. And so the first book, River of Teeth, features a character, Houndstooth, assembling a crew and aiming to dynamite a dam that would ideally flush out the feral hippos from the Mississippi into the Gulf. And of course he'd also get some revenge too, in an unrelated matter. So Taste of Marrow starts off a few months after River of Teeth ends. The surviving members of the crew are split. Houndstooth and his friend Archie are searching for Hero, Houndstooth's lover, who's been kidnapped by the team traitor Adelia, who's a hitwoman of considerable skill, and eventually the two meet up and are presented with a new crisis, a new score caper that has to be dealt with as Adelia's child is kidnapped, and basically Adelia's being blackmailed to commit one last murder in order to have her daughter return safely. I didn't get on with Taste of Marrow at all. It just didn't really work for me. I didn't particularly care for the writing or the progression of the story. I didn't like the story itself. And I think reading Taste of Marrow kind of brought a lot of my negative, like the parts that I didn't like about River of Teeth. And I have some quibbles about the world building. Quite a bit of it is anachronistic. Although, that's kind of cool too. But I think my biggest problem is River of Teeth didn't really need an antagonist that kind of develops at the end of the book. And I think that not needing an antagonist is sort of amplified here, where obviously there's a natural main antagonist in this story, Adelia, but she's redeemed and another antagonist takes her place as the main villain of the story, and that particular main villain just raises a whole lot of, raises my hackles, because in a way, from what I remember of River of Teeth, it's bits of, there's some character assassination going on for that character. And again, I'm not entirely sure, that the problem of the villain is, I think, my biggest issue. So I didn't get on with Taste of Marrow at all. And I bailed on The Factory Witches of Lowell by C.S. Malerich. This is a novella or short novel in which the strike at the Lowell factories is accompanied by, or is aided by a witch's magic. The writing is atrocious. It was bad. And that's all I'll say about that. The writing was just bad. So then I moved on to Absolute Beginners by Colin and MacInnes. This is a novel that I've struggled with for about a decade or more. I first heard of the novel through the film adaptation in 1986. There was a musical adaptation of Absolute Beginners starring David Bowie. Or really cameoing David Bowie, but David Bowie was involved and it had to become a musical. The film's pretty interesting on its own, but I can see where becoming a musical really wrecked the film and its prospects. And the production company that produced it and the actors' careers. Anyway, so Absolute Beginners, the novel, is about a nameless narrator, an 18-year-old who is navigating the last years of his teenagehood and really the dawn of youth culture and teen culture, and trying to find his place in the society, kind of trying to really sort of like mediate his values with the demands of society and so on and so forth. And it takes place like during one day a month in the form like the 3 months preceding his birthday and then on his 19th birthday, as he pretty much tries to make a success of his career, deal with family problems, friend problems, trying to get back with his girlfriend, so on and so forth. So as I mentioned before, I've tried to read this novel about twice before, and I've consistently struggled with it. It's one of those novels that the idea of it is attractive. It hooks you, but the execution of it, the actual reading of the story, doesn't really do it for you. But you're not satisfied with it. And I think with this, finally having read the whole story, then I'm finally, hopefully, able to lay Absolute Beginners to rest. So, stylistically, I quite like the novel, but I don't necessarily think the dialogue really works, or the characters. I didn't really feel that, the dialogue can get quite stilted. It sort of reads as the characters making political speeches or social commentary speeches rather than actually having dialogue, for one. And two, the characters are so stylized that they really don't read as authentic teenagers. Now, if you read this book probably when it first came out, given that there's very few books like this, the style, the voice, the characterization, I think would have been a revelation. But now, decades later, it doesn't quite have that same sort of impact because other books have done similar things and have done it better. Anyway, so yeah, and I thought one thing I did find interesting though is how through most of the story, the narrator is concerned with trying to get his ex-girlfriend, Suzette, back. But throughout the novel, I'm picking up hints that he's likely bisexual. He's, I think, fairly clearly attracted to his a gay young man who lives in the same building as him. Another young man who lives in the building he described as having kissable lips, and yeah, and his argument with this sociopathic criminal called the Wizard reads very much like a couple breaking up, as one of the members in the couple is leaving the one partner for a partner of the opposite sex. So yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting, but for the most part I really didn't get on with Absolute Beginners. Well, anyway, and finally, for this reading week, I read Swimming in the Dark by Tomasz Jedrowski. This is a gay love story set in 1980s Poland during the beginning of the Solidarity movement and the declaration of martial law that preceded the collapse of communism in Poland. And I liked part of the novel. The first chapter I thought was incredibly moving, and I think there are flashes of kind of that emotion throughout the rest of the book. But this novel is written as a sort of quasi-letter from Ludwig to his former lover, Janusz. Ludwig was a dissident who fled Poland when his homosexuality was exposed to the authorities, and Janusz is basically a rising star in the Communist Party. And that I am not a huge fan of novels being formatted as letters, in which the story is basically what the two character, writer and the recipient, have already experienced, because the novel then becomes a massive as you know. And that kind of bugs me. It's something similar to The Tiger's Daughter by K. Arsenault Rivera. It has a very similar style, and that kind of bugged me, because while yes, as the reader, I don't know what's going on, but but given that I'm reading this novel in the role of the recipient of the novel, well, that recipient knows what's going on, so it just doesn't quite work. And unfortunately, Swimming in the Dark didn't quite do it for me on that level, although I did think the romance was incredibly well done. The sense of tension and terror within that the Polish communist, like Poland under communist rule. So anyway, so it's kind of mixed on Swimming in the Dark. Now, that pretty much covers what I read this past week. So for this coming week, I will be starting tomorrow These Violent Delights by Micah Nemerever. This is a novel set on campus that draws inspiration from the Lowell mold case, which occurred in the early 20th century. And see how that goes. I'm also planning on reading, after These Violent Delights, Gay Bar by Jeremey Atherton Lin, which is a social history and memoir of the role of gay bars in gay culture. And if needed, I will be reading The Unbroken by C.L. Clarke. This is an epic fantasy in which a former child soldier is recruited by a nascent rebellion to betray the army that raised her, and aid the rebellion. And if I needed, I have quite a few other books I'll kind of bring in if we have another disappointing week like this past week was. So annoying. Anyway, so that's my reading plan. So there are two things I wanted to make note of. One is that yesterday, on Thursday, Sean the Book Maniac did a video where he talked about a few novels like 38 novels that LitHub believes you should be reading for the summer. And so after watching his video, I went to look at the rest of LitHub's list. I think Sean only talked about half of them. And the list was mostly general fiction or literary fiction with a few more literary genre fiction entries, but I largely didn't particularly care for any of the books on the list. There were maybe 3 that might be interesting, but I probably may not actually check them out. I don't know. And then also I mentioned this past week that I wanted to do a manga video on Wednesday, which I didn't do. So the purpose of that manga video, which would have been me just talking about my history with manga, was trying to decide whether or not I should get back into collecting manga. It's been a number of years since I've had manga in my personal library. And when I decided to abandon that video, because I kind of would need prompts, I think, or props. I would really sort of want to have a tankobon in my hand to sort of show you what I'm talking about, rather than just me talking. But I wasn't sure, and the video didn't quite come out how I'd hoped, so I decided to abandon it. But I'd been working on basically a cart. Well, 3 carts. 2 carts with manga, one from Alibris and one from Amazon, and one from the University of Chicago Press, because their sale is still going on, although it's about 10 days left in it. And so I kind of built up a little cart for that too, and I'm like, okay, so which one do I want to do? Which one? And then I was looking at the University of Chicago Press sale cart, and I'm like, I really don't actually want many of these books. I mean, I'll probably add them eventually, but I'm like, no, I want the manga. So I did. I ordered about 9 tankobon. You can see behind me, barely, there are 2 right there. I won't tell you which ones I picked up. I'll wait until my June book haul to talk about them, and then probably sometime in July I'll do my manga video, unless of course it's kind of basically been superseded by me actually starting to collect manga again, or at least for the moment deciding I want to collect manga again. So now I'll talk more about that during my June book haul. So anyway, BookTube, this video is going a little too long, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it here. Thank you. Have a great evening, and weekend. And I will see you next week. Hopefully on Monday, but definitely Tuesday for a tag video. So until then, BookTube, thank you and stay safe.